Welcome to our 2020 Africa Roundup interview series, a series of conversations to round up this extraordinary year with leading advisors and voices from Africa. I have the pleasure of speaking with Michael Strain. For those that don't know Michael, Michael is a partner with Clyde & Co. in Africa, East Africa. He leads Clyde & Co.'s corporate and mergers and acquisition team for East Africa, advising international companies and funds on strategic transactions across the region. He splits his time between Nairobi and Dar es Salaam, having relocated to the region from the City of London 8 years ago. His team received the highly commended award for Continent-Wide Mergers and Acquisition Team of the Year at this year's African Legal Awards. And Michael is a well-known advisor across the continent. Welcome, Michael. Let's start.
That's very, very kind of you to say, Faisal, and very nice to see you again, albeit over video.
Good. Congratulations on the award as well from all of us. Let's start with a short summary of 2020 in the context of Africa. How would you summarize 2020 and its wider impact on the continent?
Well, I think that's such a difficult question to answer, isn't it? In the sense that there are so many different aspects to touch on. I guess probably the most important for me is when I look back to kind of, the kind of early stages of, the COVID outbreak in, say, sort of February, March, April, there were such devastating predictions for the continent. I think that's fair to say. And, articles, across the international media predicting, widespread, serious loss of life. So I think it's important to recognize right at the outset that didn't happen. And I don't want to denigrate the serious human cost and economic cost and the terrible time that we've all had this year. But when you look back to how it was predicted in March, actually, relatively speaking, the continent has done so well.
Yes, I think, thank you, Michael. That's a very good summary. It's the continent, as it always does, has performed beyond expectation. So, fantastic summary. Now, let's get into specifics. From an African perspective, any specific highlights, good or bad?
Well, I think, when one looks at, the continent, it's that big challenge, isn't it? When people talk about doing business in Africa or investing in Africa, we have to remember that we are talking about the most diverse group of 54 different countries. So, and I think the reality is that it has been, a different story for different regions and different countries. And, that's been guided by, a number of different factors. When you look at, places that have gone for very serious lockdowns, for example, I guess South Africa is a great example. I think they can be applauded for the efforts to be made with test and trace and controlling the human cost and making sure that the numbers are under control. But the economic disruption there has been pretty enormous. One also then has to look at the reliance of certain economies on things like oil. So you look at Nigeria, Angola. Again, unfortunately, it's been a really difficult year. You compare that, though, with the economies of East Africa, in particular, Kenya, Tanzania, Ethiopia, less reliance on oil. You look at someone like Tanzania, gold price has been through the roof. So despite, the challenges with, the drop in tourism revenues, they've always been kind of replaced from a kind of government budgetary perspective with the increased revenues from gold. And, so I would say where we have more diversified economies on the continent, they've fared better. And unfortunately, it has exposed weaknesses in places that are more reliant on one or two things.
Yeah, that would be an accurate sort of capture of the macro qualities across the continent. Now let's take a deeper dive into these larger economies that you've already touched on. So Nigeria, Kenya, and South Africa in specific, the largest economies in the continent. And let's focus on family businesses and large corporates in those countries. Talk us through how the year has been for them in those large economies.
Well, I think it depends what kind of business you're in. Is I think the defining thing. We were just chatting with the people from GoToWebinar, and I said it must have been a better year for you than most, and I think they agreed. So I think I think where you have obviously the hospitality industry has been really hard hit. Tourism has been it's obviously been devastating. I think for FMCG, financial services, I mean, it's a mixed bag, but things perhaps haven't been so bad. And it's also, again, that so much of this has been driven by the impact that like lockdown measures, for example, would have on your business. So if your business is involved in things that people do outside of the house, or you're in a country where your type of business was restricted from operating, then that has had a huge impact.
And then in the context of international investment and specifically inward investment into Africa, what have been the trends and challenges you would have you'd say that characterize the year 2020 from an inward perspective?
Well, I think unfortunately, when one looks at sort of trends around inward investment in Africa, I think the trend has been a bit less of it. Is just the reality, due to the loss of confidence, the uncertainty created by the pandemic. I think unfortunately we've just seen quite a bit less inward investment, or at least people not kind of killing deals, but definitely moving into a more of a kind of holding pattern. M&A is what I do every day, and the reality is that we have seen, relatively speaking, a quieter year, or at least in the kind of early parts of that year. But what I can say is things have picked up incredibly over the last 3 months, and actually particularly over the last 6 weeks. So I think that in itself is a huge kind of sign of confidence returning. Now, this is more East Africa stuff, and as we mentioned earlier, I think the economies here have gotten off a bit more lightly than perhaps some other parts of the continent. But it really bodes well for 2021, and I think it shows life has to go on. When you look at places like Tanzania, Kenya, Ethiopia, the economies in each of those countries have actually grown this year, which in itself is incredible. And I think it's I think it demonstrates why Africa is is actually probably going to move up the agenda for some investors as a result of the pandemic, if you can believe it.
Yeah, so I think you've taken us nicely into 2021. Where do you see the opportunity? Let's go back to family businesses and large corporates. And we're talking here about large corporates and family business that either have regional or pan-African exposure or have ambitions for that. Where do you see opportunities for them in 2021?
So when I took the decision to relocate to the continent from London, it was initially the kind of big oil and gas play in East Africa that had kind of caught my attention and tempted me down here. One of the things, interestingly, Faisal, that I quickly found out was, that's a great opportunity, but that is only one very, very small piece of the wider story. And you ask me, where are the opportunities on the continent? Now, honestly, that they are almost in every sector. Now, I'm not saying that is that each sector is as good as each other, and that there is huge variance from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But you look at things like telecoms, agribusiness, mining, breweries, financial services. I mean, there are, when you look at the kind of underlying demographics of so many countries on the continent, these economies are still growing. People are getting richer. They need these services. So it's the opportunities really are absolutely diverse. And I mean, gold's an obvious one. Whilst the gold price remains very high, I think that opens up opportunities for a lot of assets that people weren't looking at. But it's the future's bright and the opportunities really are incredible.
And then in terms of international capital and encouraging international capital and inward investment into the continent, obviously that's going to play a very large part in helping revive some of the economies and rebuild some of these economies that have been greatly impacted this year. What can governments do across Africa to incentivize and encourage inward investment into Africa?
Yeah, thanks, Faisal. And that's, I think, like a really, really important question. And I'm not sure if you would have seen, we've actually had the opportunity to participate in a few sessions with the Tony Blair Foundation earlier this year, actually looking at this specific issue and trying to, do a sort of deep dive as to, what steps governments can take. And I think if one summarizes it sort of very simply, really what it's about is it's about certainty and consistency. An international investor looks at, say an economy like Kenya, and they say, okay, right, we want to roll out X product, X service. We see that demographics are moving in the right way. We predict that X number of people are going to buy our products. And we can then do our financial modeling, and we're gonna have to pay this tax, et cetera, and then people can kind of work out, roughly speaking, whether it's going to be a deal worth doing or not. The challenge, of course, that we see probably still too much on the continent is government will then change rules unexpectedly, and what you have is a playing field that can change at short notice and can dramatically impact the outcome of a particular investment. So it's all about clear, consistent rules for foreign investment. It's about making things quicker and easier for people to come in. You look at the incredible things that have been done in Rwanda, incorporating companies in a single day, and the sort of rivaling Singapore. And it's just making it easy for someone to come and spend their money and put their money into your economy. And of course, the final thing is really, properly taking steps to eliminate or decrease corruption, because it's the elephant in the room, and it is still a massive problem on the continent. And international investors do not and cannot engage in that kind of activity. And if there are still certain places on the continent where, in order to make money, it is almost required for one to do those kind of things, it's a huge barrier. So, I would say almost of all of them, in certain countries, actually dealing with corruption is the most important thing.
No, we totally accept that, and we see these challenges from our side as well. So, thank you very much for that snapshot. Final question from me, Michael. How will Africa do in 2021?
Very good question, Faisal. I mean, it's hard to say at this stage. I mean, I think a lot of people have psychologically looked at the end of this year as being sort of some kind of barrier, and then perhaps after we all come back from Christmas, things might be a little bit better. But of course, the beginning of January is now only a couple of weeks away. That being said, I think in lots of places, or the majority of places on the continent, actually, with certain restrictions, life and economic activity is more largely returning to normal. And I think you can't underestimate the incredible efforts and determination of the people of this continent just to get on with life. And we just have to accept and have accepted the challenges that this year has thrown at us. And you know what, we've just kind of gone on with it. So, you know, when I talked earlier about the, you know, the massive uptick we've seen in deal activity, I think that bodes exceptionally well for the new year. And when we certainly look in particular at the economies of, you know, East Africa, you know, they're more diverse, less dependent on one resource. There's no reason to not expect, you know, things to kind of charge ahead here in the way that they were broadly doing before. But when, of course, you view that in the context of the wider world, you know, the growth is, you know, this is, you know, pretty much one of the fastest growing regions of the world next year, which is incredible. And of course, that feeds directly into, you know, our plans as Clyde & Co. Despite some pretty serious challenges, we were able to open our office in Nairobi on the 1st of October this year, which, yeah, it was. Yeah, it's an experience I will never forget, and you know, all credit to our, you know, our Kenyan partner Jared Kangwana. You know, negotiated everything out with me remotely, but you know, we've got that launched. We've got incredible plans to open other things elsewhere in the region, and look, it's all about just capitalizing on this huge opportunity, and then also actually being that trusted partner for, you know, for our clients. I mean, we've got a, you know, huge international portfolio of clients, some of whom are obviously very active on the continent, but quite a few others who sort of looked at it and said, oh, I'm not sure about that. But once you find your entry point, once you find your advisors who you trust already, but they can also then lead you down into these new markets and these new areas of growth, yeah, the opportunities are positive. But as I said, lots of deals to, or a couple of deals at least, to get over the line before the end of the year, and then I think we could all do with a bit of a well-earned break, eh?
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us, Michael, today. Thank you to our viewers for watching. Until next time, stay safe.